I'm Edith Colon Lopez, and I found myself in um, 19 early 1985. I had been living in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up. I found myself um, as a 24-year-old single and pregnant, and my all sides of my family they basically turned their backs on me. So I moved up to Pennsylvania, and I was able to, some friends let me stay with them, and then they took me to a place in Coatesville, Pennsylvania that was a group home for single mothers. And I was the oldest there when I did deliver in, actually on this day, October 11th, which is my oldest daughter's birthday. Um, I delivered in Brandywine Hospital in Brandywine, Coatesville, Pennsylvania, Brandywine Hospital. I guess I don't have to go into the particulars here, but I I had my first child, and that was October 11th, 1985. We ended up, we were homeless, and so we went from there. We couldn't go back to the home. Uh, so an old fashioned Mennonite family took us in. We lived on a dairy farm for a year, my baby and I, and then another girl had come to live there, and her name was Sue, and she and I moved. We stayed on the farm until um, September 1986, and we moved up to Allentown, which is where I live now, and I've been there. I've been here in this area ever since. And Sue and I got an apartment together, and then we ended up taking in another girl. Sue was 18. The other girl, Christine, was 17. I was like the big sister, 25. And so we ended up, helping each other out. Christine was much more of a critical thinker than I was at the time. Even though she was younger, I took her to a church that was simply called the Brethren, or actually the chapel and the Brethren. And so uh, Sue and I had started going a few weeks before, or a few months before Christine had come to live with us. Sue was fully embraced by the Brethren, even more so than me, and they had known me since I was a kid, because my father, when I had visited from Baltimore to on my weekends with my dad, he used to take me to this little chapel, and so I remembered randomly. I remembered how to get there, the back roads. I took Sue there, so Sue had the white baby. I had the biracial baby. She was really light skinned, and Christine had the Puerto Rican baby. So oddly enough, they embraced Sue. They tolerated me, but on the sly, they told. This is something I found out 30, 36 years, 37 years later, because Christine told me last year. I hadn't been in touch with her for a long time, and we sat down and talked. And here, the two of us, Sue and I, were the two accepted single mothers at this church, but Christine was not, and I didn't know that. She was told through my roommate Sue not to come back because they didn't want to be known as a church of single mothers. And Christine never told me, and we lost touch, and then we regained contact last year. And I had actually randomly become friends with her son, and her son and her son's significant other, his partner, they had my paintings on their wall in their apartment. And so Sue last year went to visit her son Jaden, and she said, I know her. I haven't seen her for a long time, but I know her. And she's like, if it's Sue I'm thinking of. And then she said, can you show me a picture of her? And Jaden showed a picture, and it was, it was the Edie that, because they're, you don't run into a lot of Edies, I guess, around here. Although I'm sure in the United Kingdom, Edith is a more prevalent name, but, anyway. So Christine told me, I told her the whole cult story because she hadn't been filled in on all the trauma because I had lost touch with her. But anyway, here I had been friends with her son, and then we were able to get back in touch again. So we caught up on everything, and the way it goes is Christine kind of just like, she had been in the neighborhood. She got her own apartment, but Sue and I had lost touch. But Sue and I continued to live together until the summer of 1988, and I brought a guy who I was working with to one of the church picnics, the Brethren's picnics, and because he was an outsider, I was told to leave the picnic with my friend, and I was told to basically leave and think about what I was doing, and then think about it and then come back. So that was my point. After being in the Brethren for 2 years, that was my point of I didn't understand, why I was, experiencing this. And and I decided that I wasn't going to go to the church anymore. And my boyfriend Craig, who was who we were working together, we ended up living together. Once my roommate Sue found out that he was actually living with me, then because she had decided to leave the apartment. But once the word got out that I was living in sin, then there was an even more dark cloud hanging over my head. So I managed to stay away from the Brethren for about 2 months, and Craig, my boyfriend, was like my only real support system. And one day he borrowed my car, and then I came outside, and the car was parked outside of my apartment, but there was no Craig, and there was no sign of him. And here's another random story about how 30 years with Craig, he just disappeared, like he fell off the side of the earth. So exactly 30 years later, in 2018, I got a letter from him, and he explained to me what happened, how he had run into a few men from my church when he was gassing up my car at a gas station. And, petrol, I know you call it petrol over there. So he, one of the men from my church approached him and said, they recognized my car, and they said, you are getting in the way of Edie attending church, and God told us that if you don't stop seeing her, that something bad is going to happen to you. So my boyfriend Craig said to himself, wow, this doesn't sound good. And he went to his parents' house, told them what they had said, and his parents said, come and stay with us. We will help you get your feet on the ground and stay away from her, meaning me. And so that is what he did. And I didn't hear from him for 30 years. And until he decided to try to track me down and write a letter to me and tell me what really happened, because I had never figured it out. And so I ended up staying in the group for another 7 years of abuse, just because, at that point I went into counseling, but it was Christian counseling. So it was like, but even so, my Christian counselor was still enough of a critical thinker to not think that it was really healthy for me to go back to the Brethren. But the loneliness set in. All of my friends were there, and I just ended up going back. And then I ended up marrying into the group. And then I was, when I was in the group, I ended up being one of the poorer families. And because they had a strict code on birth control, that is no birth control and nothing else, there were a lot of babies. And I happened to be one of those ladies in the group who had one baby after the other. So from April 1990 to June 1995, I had 5 babies in 62 months. And I was about, ready to just like really, really, I was wrung out. I was experiencing a lot of things at the church that were didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I think that the thing that got me thinking the hardest was when I was in the hospital having my 4th child in November 1991. I left my 3 kids with my former roommate, Sue, who I had actually taken to the group, and she and her husband ended up being one of the golden couples. And she and her husband watched my baby Jordan, who was 2 at the time, and then I had let's see, how did it go? Cassia would have been 1, Jordan would have been 2, and Martha would have been about 5. So when I was having my 4th child, those 3 stayed with Sue and her husband, and they stayed with them about 3 days, and then brought them back. And my 2-year-old came back with a black and blue bottom, and it was because he had wet the bed. And because I was not high up in the ranks of the church, the Brethren, but Sue and Wendell were, I couldn't even say a word about it or against them. And I just kind of held this in. And what I did was, because I couldn't really wrap my head around this whole thing, I just started writing things down in a journal and keeping it. And my situation, my married situation, wasn't good. I was in an abusive marriage. I had these little kids, and I had other issues. And it seemed like I was always had just woke up and had to pick, the battle of the day. And the biggest battle was just keeping my presence of mind. So by spring 1993, when Waco, Texas happened with David Koresh, and the group out there in Waco, Texas, I really, what I was watching on TV and seeing as far as his body language, is sort of resonating with me, because it was like too oddly familiar to me. And so I really just would write my thoughts down, and I'd be really, really afraid that somebody in the church group would see my journal and somehow it would get out that I had these questions. And, it just there wasn't enough of a way for me to compare like toxic theology with regular theology with just like a normal way of life and thinking. I just didn't have it. I didn't have the measuring tool, so to speak. And but I suppose the thing that happened was by June 1995, with the birth of my last child, Dougie, my husband abandoned me, and I was left with 5 kids at that time. Didn't have the 6th yet, and so I struggled a lot, and I also didn't have a working vehicle, couldn't get to church, and it was a 45-minute drive. And so I had sort of an excuse not to go, and I decided this is the time to leave. And I didn't tell anybody in the group that was my intention. And I just sat on it, and in a few months, my husband and I reconciled, which was probably it was a mistake, but I ended up, through that having another baby, and then the next year, was a little bit more, well, not quite stronger, but a little bit more able to like think this out. So it had been about 9 months since I had left the group. In my head, left the group, although I didn't convey that to anyone in the group. I still talked to people. They thought that I was planning on coming back when I had a working vehicle. But when February 1996 came around, then I got a phone call from my former roommate, Sue, and her husband, and they wanted to take Martha on a camping trip with the church for the spring, and they were making reservations. And this was a yearly trip that the church made to a state park in Pennsylvania called World's End. And so anyway, I didn't really want to do it, but I didn't want to raise anybody's questions about me, and because I just was in still sort of dark age thinking, I didn't really know what to do. So I talked to somebody in my family, and this person highly, highly recommended that I not let my daughter go in the spring. They were concerned about the influence that might be on her. And so I called my old roommate back, and actually talked to her husband and said, I really don't feel comfortable letting my daughter go. And then it was like within an hour or less that I got a phone call from the pastor of the church, and it was Dave M. And so Dave M., who was basically speaking down to me and saying, why do you have such an attitude problem? And I think that was the moment where I just had enough, because there wasn't any reason why I had to answer to anybody. Nobody had been keeping track of me or the misfortunes that I had gone through when I had been abandoned by my husband with 5 kids the year before, and no food, no diapers. Nobody was coming up and helping me, and I didn't feel, obligated to feel like I had to explain myself to a group that, just the fact that I wasn't coming to church, was their main concern was I wasn't putting enough effort into it to help myself. And I had just been through some really awful struggles, as someone who had these little kids. And as a matter of fact, 3 babies in diapers at the same time when I had been abandoned the year before. And I had to, provide for these kids and take care of them when my husband decided to just dance his way out and do something else. So, so anyway, that was the moment where I stepped up to the plate, and I got a ride down to the pastor's house. I appeared at his front door, and I decided I'm going to do this. I'm just going to tell him what I think. And I did. And he looked at me, and I said, Dave, you're not a pastor. You are a bloody dictator. And with that, he stood like about 6'3", and he stood over me, and he just gave me this sociopathic stare, which I know what that means now, but I didn't even know that term back then. It's terrifying when he would look at you like that. He could make you shake in your boots if he wanted to. And but I was strong enough that day in February 1996, but I wasn't strong enough a couple of days later. And when the word was put out, that I spoke up, and so the word was put out to all my friends to shun me. And then I did try to take my life. So that was like the beginning of mental health care for me. And it was a blessing in disguise. But, it was several years before I had the wherewithal to really be able to put things together and really understand the brainwashing process and what really happened to me, and to really get my bearings back, my mind back. It was really terrifying, and I can't explain to anybody. I can, but they can't really understand unless they understand the terror of people shunning you and talking ill of you, and when you only are trying to just put one foot in front of the other, and you just get mentally and verbally bullied, and that's what I went through. I've been out of it now. I call February 1996 my actual exit date, although physically I hadn't been back since June 1995. And so, I was 9.5 years with that group under their influence. And it's been a struggle just not to fall back into some of the patterns of thinking, because when you've been influenced by a cult, your mind has been manipulated, and you can find yourself being manipulated by other people, even if it's not a whole group. You can still find yourself being influenced by people if someone sees your weaknesses. And there have been people like that have come in my life, and I've had to face them down too. And anyway, so my view on the whole shunning aspect is that I have experienced shunning, familial shunning, that is from family. So it wasn't a strange thing to me. However, when I went through the whole experience on a whole cult level, we're talking like being shunned by the whole 100+ people in the church, and some of them I had been very close to. And the effect on me was, because at that time, in February 1996, I didn't have internet access. And I, of course, when I got myself together, I was able to get to the library and get my hands on as many books as I could about cults. But because, the information age wasn't at such a golden pitch as it is now, And there was no connection as far as being able. There were friends in my neighborhood who actually, a couple of friends, and my dear best friend who had only been my friend for a couple of years at that point. She and her husband reached out to me, and they were the people that stood by me when these people had turned their backs on me. And I took Debbie, who is my best friend now. I took her to a ladies' meeting one time at the Brethren Church, and she told me straight out. She said, "Your pastor's eyes scare me," and we even stopped speaking to each other at some point because I was so offended with her. But she could clearly see something that I couldn't at the time. But when she knew what happened to me and how I was shunned and how I had the impact of it had made me want to try to take my life, she was there for me. And, she and her husband reached out to me and my kids. They helped us, if we needed stuff sometimes to get to the store or other things that probably wouldn't seem like a lot, but at the time when you need emotional support and you're suffering and you're cut off. And while I was going through this with the Brethren, the cult church, I was also experiencing extreme antagonism from in-laws. So, basically I had like two big wars and two different fronts, and it was just very difficult. Plus I had these little kids, couple babies in diapers at the same time and some being potty trained. And, so it was just like very, very, very difficult. And, it took me a long time to get my mental health straight. And, it was a really, really difficult thing. And, a lot of people didn't understand what I went through. They looked down on me. I just, when you're going through mental woes like this, it's hard to explain yourself, and you shouldn't have to explain yourself. But people can be judgmental. And fortunately, I did have a couple of good friends. Debbie and another friend who was like a grandpa to my kids. His name was Arnold, and he let me use his car so I could get to the store sometimes. Other times, the kids and I would be walking a couple of miles to get groceries, and we'd all have backpacks, and we'd all like get on the bus and take it back. But we'd walk that couple of miles to the store, and had a double stroller, put a couple of babies in it. It was hard times all around, but there was always somebody who was kind enough to help me out in my different stages of going through this. And I have to say that my mom and my stepfather from Baltimore really came through for me, and they could see how hard I was really trying with this difficult situation. And my stepfather gave me recommendations of books to read, and because he was very well read, and he had some understanding of the subject, and he had seen from the very beginning when I first came back on good terms with my family again, because I was sort of like the black sheep of the family. And then, I had come up to Pennsylvania, hung in there, struggled. I was a single mom, kind of proved myself, although, I didn't prove myself in other ways as far as judgment. I did put my best foot forward as far as trying to be responsible for my child. And at that time, and then I married into this church. That is, I married in the church. The chapel was the place I got married. My husband was he hadn't been a part of the group until I brought him in with me, and he was, but he was someone that the pastor and his wife had been familiar with, so it wasn't like a complete stranger. So anyway, the shunning aspect was devastating, and that just level of shunning, I had not gone through that before, and that, you know, it would cause you to completely lose hope, even when, you know, you have these little children and people that you're responsible for, and why would you go and do something like that? And it's just like, you know, it was just like a big black hole for me, and until I started reading and putting the pieces together. And I didn't really even hear other people's stories for several years forward. You know, there I am in the mid 80s, you know, still in the dark ages with no internet, as far as, you know, unless I went to the library. The only thing I could do is just get my hands on books and read and read and read. And that's what I did. And fortunately, I mean, for people that are involved in cults now, when they find out that they're involved in cults, they have more access to information, which is very, very key to getting this, like, lifesaver. You know, like you're sort of drowning, and you know, it's sort of like you need that lifesaver, or you need that rope thrown out to you that you can pull yourself in. And the only way that I could really do it was by reading and just continuing to hope that I wasn't, you know, at the time was given the pronouncement that I was going to hell, you know, and I believed it. I half believed it. There was a part of me that had enough critical thinking in me that I knew that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And I had to sort of hang in there. And as the years went by, I was able to accumulate more information. And then by reading the books of other people who had gone through it, like Dr. Stephen Hassan, and then listening to Dr. Stephen Hassan's videos later, and his talks on his cult experience in the Moonies, and how he was able to, by reading, pull himself out of it. And he quoted I can think of the last name, Dr. Lifton, Lifton, and he wrote a book. He's an older man, like probably in his late 70s. And Dr. Lifton wrote a book on his experience of the mindset, or the experience that he had of going over to China and interviewing people as a psychiatrist, and people who had endured the prison sentences in communist China. And so he was able to come up with sort of different ways to explain how people will sort of be brainwashed. And I think there's about 8 characteristics that he lists of cults. And but he doesn't use the word cult. In fact, he wasn't studying cults. He was studying, there's another term for it. And I can see, you know, I've given talks. I gave a talk at a coffee house about cults, and I had everything on my note cards. And obviously, I can't recall the name of the book or the vernacular, but there are characteristics of a cult and that comes from I believe it's the 23rd chapter of Dr. J. I think it's Dr. J. Lifton's book, and it's about mind control and how in communist China in their prisons they use mind control, and it sort of resonates with how cults function. And so there are people who are cult experts who have read Dr. J. Lifton's book, such as Dr. Stephen Hassan, and he actually Dr. Stephen Hassan, or I guess he pronounces Hassan. He was able to actually read Dr. Lifton's book, and I think he actually met him and was able to talk to him. And then Dr. Steve Hassan started a group in Boston, Massachusetts. It's actually a resource center. And when I was talking to the person who contacted me, who was living in Scandinavia and who had been going through this cult experience, I was able to refer him to these books by Dr. Stephen Hassan and Dr. Robert J. Lifton. That is Robert J. Lifton. Dr. Robert J. Lifton, I believe that's his name. So those two people, those two books, one Combating Cult Mind Control by Dr. Stephen Hassan, that really was empowering. And also the thicker book, which was much thicker and much more laborious reading, but very informative. And I'm sorry that I can't think of the name of the book right now, but it was his study of people who were, I'm sorry, Dr. Robert J. Lifton's study of people who were imprisoned by communist China. And these were not only people there, nationals, but also Americans who had been brainwashed to the point where they turned their back on what they knew as to be truth to embrace what was being fed to them, I guess, under duress. So anyway, I'm sorry I can't recall that other book by Dr. Robert J. Lifton. I'm sorry I can't. I didn't really think of actually sitting down and having that information right in front of me, but I can definitely say that, it was well worth reading the material that I have. And, anybody that is going through a process of deconstructing and deprogramming, like if you have to do it yourself, which was a big thing for me, was I didn't have the counseling, and unfortunately, there's not really a lot of counseling available for people who are who've been victims of coercion, mental coercion. So I mean, there is counseling available, but not enough of that aspect of it. And I mean, if you're specifically going through like complex PTSD from, a cult experience or whatever you're experiencing from that, your mind's been tampered with. And if you don't have the wherewithal to do it yourself, you have to have somebody else guide you through it. And it was just like, for me, it was just a work in progress for years, because when you've been victimized, you are certainly vulnerable to being victimized again. And there's a whole nother piece of it. Like maybe we could talk another time, when I had my PTSD moment, which happened November 2016, which would have been the, let's see, 96, 2006, it would have been 20 years that I was out of the cult, and I had a PTSD moment that lasted for several months, and it was triggered by something that happened to me at a fundamentalist church that I was going to. And that's another thing, was that if you've gotten out of the hole, if you dug yourself out of the hole, you might have to do it again, and maybe not as you might not go as deep as the first time, but when you've recovered from a cult, it's like your cult self is the skeleton of it is still there. Like, I can't explain it, but somebody who is slick and sly enough to pick out your vulnerability could just throw you right back into it, because they might see your vulnerability. If they know that you've been in a cult, if they know you've had your mind tampered with, and if they are a person who exploits people, they might very well go for you. As far as your you have been exploited before, and when I say you, me, I have been exploited before. I have been exploited again by other people who have posed as friends, and you have to guard yourself, because you might just find yourself back in the same hole again, and having to dig out from, like, oh wow, it happened to me again. Here, someone is trying to control me. Someone's trying to manipulate me. How did that happen? How did I not see the red flags? So you just always have to be on your guard, and you just have to, like, I don't know, just why am I vulnerable? Why did I become victimized? Why could I become victimized again? I don't know. Why are some people alcoholics? Why are some people vulnerable to certain addictions? I don't know. It's just it's not. It doesn't make me a bad person. It just makes me vulnerable, and doesn't mean that I'm not strong, because I was strong enough to leave it. So I can be strong again, but I have to guard myself. And you, as a person who had been a cult victim and now survivor, have to guard yourself and not become exploited again. So that's all I have to say.